Welcome to Round Hill Radio, the podcast from Round Hill Community Church. Through our conversations, we discover the holy and the ordinary, find moments of grace and peace, and redefine what we're talking about when we talk about faith. Welcome to Round Hill Radio. I'm Leslie.
I'm Ed.
I'm Dan.
Hey, Dan.
Hey, Dan.
Welcome to the party.
Glad to be back, as always.
So we asked Dan to join us today because we're talking about a special event we're starting next week. I can hardly believe it's already here. In that we have chosen to set some time aside for planning, which is not something we have done in quite such an intentional way before. We're taking 3 separate days over 2 weeks to dream and scheme worship and what that looks like in all manners of iteration. Did that make sense?
Sure.
We'll go with that. So Ed, what prompted us to start this? What made you want this as part of our experience?
Well, I think this was something that resonated with all of us, right? I'm not exactly sure how the germ of the idea started, but
all great ideas, we don't know where it started.
Exactly, somewhere back there. But the really lovely part about it is that I think in some ways the timing was right because we were starting to feel like there was an emergence out of the pandemic. I mean, we're still in the pandemic, but there's a different feel now for sure with the vaccinations and a number of other changes that are happening that are showing some positive signs. I think that inspired us to think about what will the church look like post-pandemic, or even now as we're starting to emerge from it. And that's a question that takes more exploration than we normally have time for on a given Tuesday when we have our normal staff meetings. So the idea of giving some dedicated time to the question of what will worship look like in this new emerging world is a really important one. I'm really thrilled that we're giving it this time of day. I'm big on thinking time these days, and I think that that's something that we don't include enough of in our lives in general, just time to ponder. So what is it that we actually want? And so I think that's what started it. A combination of it was already in us, probably wanting to happen, and then the notion that we're moving into something new. And I just want to add that I think we're all in a very interesting space in that we've got this time when we're obviously wanting to continue the traditions of the past, but we're also wanting to be open to something that hasn't maybe taken place yet. So we're open to whatever the Spirit might want to lead us. So that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, I'm connected with this idea that there kind of is no status quo when it comes to worship. I was thinking back to like all the things that were just sort of accepted as, oh, we do these because we've kind of always done them. And I think there's definitely an opportunity to play in a way that maybe there wasn't before, when there maybe were more expectations instead of, I feel like there's more hope. More hope. It's more of a hope than an expectation. For certain things.
Yeah.
What do you think, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, I love the analogy of a sandbox. My boys, when they were younger, used to love to play in the sandbox. And sometimes there were certain sections that they couldn't play in, or certain toys that they couldn't use. And we asked the question, well, why? And what happens when you open up the full sandbox and you open up all the toy chest and you can play with everything? You just see this imagination and creativity and joy in little children. And so for us to be able to spend some time together and play in this sandbox, to be able to dream and scheme and create, it's the right time to be able to do that. As Ed said, we're emerging out of something and we're not sure what the future is going to look like, but we have this really exciting opportunity for the 3 of us to actually spend some quality time together and to take a step back. And, one of the things that the listeners, may know is generally the 3 of us meet at least once a week. Now, the last year has been over Zoom, and we sort of look ahead to the Sunday that's coming up, and sometimes, further ahead, like what's the series. And we do talk about what songs and what prayers, like what's going to come together to elevate the theme of the scripture, the theme of that Sunday. And that's been wonderful. But for us to take a step back and to really look at the whole picture of like, why do we even gather? What is worship all about? You need time, right? Those are the thinking times, the thinking brainstorming sessions, the retreats. And we just haven't had the time to be able to do that. But we're coming into this new season of life, a new season of church, new season of ministry, it feels like. And so I'm excited to be able to dream together and share ideas and also trust that the Spirit's been working in the three of us, among other people, of course, but the three of us in prompting different dreams and hopes and visions. So we'll get a chance to just hash them all out. And Leslie, I think you're getting some sticky notes and colored markers, which you love to do.
Oh my gosh.
Organized. So we need that. That's
all of the office supplies have been, they're all on my desk.
Colorful and organized. That's the two things that you definitely bring, among many other things, but you definitely bring those.
I'm like a party planner, and I'm like, I've got the party hats.
We don't know what the content is going to be, but it's going to look great, right?
It's going to look really organized and really optimistic. What it made me think of that you just said, Dan, was like, we meet and we plan. And of course, we're always so intentional about how we plan the messages we're creating. But there's an element of, I find, a filling in the blanks, right? I need a prelude. I need something for this spot. I need something for this spot. It needs to speak to this topic, and it needs to have this sort of energy or have this sort of sound. And that's sort of that's sort of how I sometimes in the nitty gritty just kind of go fill in the blank, fill in the blank, fill in the blank. Well, what if either there are no blanks or everything's blank? And what if we come at it with no preconceived notions? And what if worship, so I have our planning document that I made.
Of course.
I had too much fun with, but I have the question, all capitals question is, what experiences of worship would we create if we have no limitations? Mm-hmm. And I think that for some people that can evoke something very specific. And the idea is we're not evoking anything specific. We're starting from a place of wanting to create meaning and connection. And that probably won't sound or look like anything anyone's seen before, especially not here. And so the idea is that we hope to create a once a month worship experience that is innovative, that's basically all I have right now. Because this is obviously, you're seeing us before this process. So we're going to come back and record a podcast after, and we might have gone a completely different direction than we thought. So we're going to have 3 different days over 2 weeks. So we have some time in between to go back, do some of our own research, do our own thinking time, percolating time, as I call it in the choir, and really give ourselves the grace and space to really sit and think about all these things. And then also coming together, because, I think one of the reasons that we 3 work so well as a team is because a lot of the times we don't know where the good ideas come from. We'll get going, we'll get talking, and we'll be in this sort of energy of excitement, and we can't trace back to where it started, but we know we're excited about where it's going. And I'm excited. I'm so excited for this. I think it's going to be really interesting and create hopefully some really meaningful time for our congregation.
Yeah, well said. Well, I think right now the church is in such, I'd like to say, interesting place, this kind of opportunity for creative ferment. And I think anytime there's been a major shift in the life of the church, it's always tried to figure it out. What's it going to bring with it? Mm-hmm. And as it goes into the future, and what's it going to, how open is it going to be, try to be towards wherever the Spirit might lead. So these are the 2 things I think we're trying to keep together in some ways. And we talked a little bit earlier about the use of the word hybrid now to describe what the church is calling. I mean, we weren't talking about being a hybrid church 14 months ago, but now we are. And a hybrid church is one that has both, a physical on in-person service or services. Now maybe they're indoors and outdoors, which was not the case for many churches 14 months ago. And there's an online service. The online service might be the same length as the in-person, and some online services might be 5 minutes long. So it's so much came up as a result of the pandemic of people having to shift and pivot in order to reach their congregations and help people stay connected. So who knows if that much change has happened in 14 months, let's kind of ride the wave, right, to see where it's going to push us going out into the future.
Yeah. And that's such a new element of worship planning that I don't think we had ever thought about. I think, if you'd asked me a year ago about online church, I think my first thought would have been, we're filming actual church. Like we have a video camera running while in-person worship happens. And then that's either live streamed or shown later or something. I think that was my preconceived notion a year and a half ago. And then now we have these sort of two services that are similar. They're not always identical. Especially this summer, they're not going to be identical. And so then how do we also look at the medium of virtual worship? Sorry if you hear my dog, of virtual worship and play it to its strengths, right? Like how do we give it what it needs and what that audience needs for those who are unable or for whatever reason, not able to come to worship if they live far away, or, there's so many reasons why that's meaningful to people. And I think we always knew that it was going to be helpful for people, but I don't think we knew. I think we're only still learning what we can do with it as a tool, like the different cool things that can be done. And that's a whole, I think that it's a whole other worship retreat,
Sure.
Well, and Leslie, you're right. That platform, there's so much that can be done. And we've experimented. We've had some fun doing that, where you're using multimedia and just using media in different ways. And with a skilled video editor, such as yourself. There you go.
One of those.
Amen. But how you can pull pieces together and do things creatively that we just couldn't do in person in the sanctuary, because that has it's a wonderful space and there's a lot of fullness there, but it has limitations because of the space. So the online space and that digital platform has so much potential that not only can elevate the message and can breathe life and creativity in a different way to enforce, or reinforce that message, but also speaks to a different audience as well. As we talked about this hybrid church, and Ed, you're right. We had hybrid cars. We never thought we had hybrid congregations, 15 months ago, but here we are. But we also realize that in people's lives, in all of our lives, and I imagine the people who are listening, you are listening to this on some sort of digital device, right? Your phone or your laptop or a desktop. And our lives are integrated with it in the digital world in every aspect. Everything we do, including now education, but buying groceries to, entertainment, to how we get our information is digital, or at least can be digital. And yet the sacred space and church for a long time, for whatever reasons, have resisted moving into the world that everyone lives in. And everyone lives in that world, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, often with the exception of 1 hour a week on a Sunday morning. And so there is something to be able to be removed from the digital world and have this safe, sacred space. I do get that. And I like that, but it's also not the real world that we're all living in. And so it's going to be really interesting for the church and for our church to really figure out and discern, how do we leverage and utilize technology, not just to say, yes, we have an online service, but to actually help people moving forward in their life, moving forward in their faith, moving forward as a force for good, with their families and then their homes. And how can we be then in their world, the world that we all live in, that digital world, not just 1 hour on the Sunday morning. So I think there's great potential and possibilities, and it's going to be fun to explore what that looks like moving forward.
Absolutely. I think there's also an opportunity for this broadening, or this sense of broadening of our audience, our congregation, our church, our community, that this affords. Because, if I actually just yesterday was looking at our podcast stats, and we have international listeners, we don't necessarily have people who are able to be in our space with us, but you're part of our community. Every person that listens to our podcast, and we know we have people all across the country. Thank you for listening, and all across the world now. And I think that's such an amazing thing, that these three people, two of whom are currently in the same building right now, recording into the rooms, and I'm just a few miles down the road, that we in our sort of our smaller town, if you will. I know we're in a big metropolitan area, but the small town church can be part of a global community, and that there isn't a huge threshold that we have to cross in order to make that happen. That we can hold out our hand and say we have a message of love and acceptance and community and kindness, and we don't have to be a multi-million-dollar huge organization to do that. That we can be us and still we can find our people.
Yeah. I'm thinking back to your original question, Leslie, about what prompted this worship retreat in the first place. And I think part of what did set it in motion was a wonderful conversation we had with Mark Miller, who's a colleague of yours, and you've introduced him to us. And he's someone who's been composing music and works as a director of a church music program. So he's got a lot of experience there too. But I think one of the questions he asked had to do with what do we want to be thinking when we plan worship? Mm-hmm. And, what are the thoughts we want to have in our minds? And I think we're trying to be clearer about that as we go forward. And, to your point about all these different, and Dan, you'd mentioned this too, the way that formats are changing in terms of where people are getting their experience of worship. I remember many years ago, I was living in a big city at the time, and I heard someone talk about his ideal church worship experience. He said one Sunday each month he would go to the small parish church that was near his home within walking distance. Then he would go to the big cathedral in the center of the city, because that would give him the big picture of the church universal. And then he said maybe 1 or 2 Sundays a month, I wouldn't go anywhere, or he wouldn't go anywhere, but he would take a walk in the woods and meditate and do something different. Well, now we've got online platforms to add to all of that. And going forward, it could be that people will say, I want all of that. Every year, I'm going to look back at each year and say, hey, there were a certain number of times I worshiped online. There were some times I worshiped in my local church, and so on. So it could be this incredibly rich experience of worship going forward, quite different in its realm of choice than would have been the case, let's say 20, 30, 40 years ago, where people went to the same church every Sunday, same time, expected the same format, more or less. That's kind of been thrown up in the air in some ways. Now we get to see, all right, how do we help people access that richness? That's a really great question to be asking.
And Ed, to that point too, it helps with the on, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, if you want to experience worship, the typical ideas where you have to go to a church 1 hour on a Sunday, and that's when worship happens. Now we know that worship is not just the gathered community of believers. Worship happens in a walk in the woods. Anytime we're connecting with the sacred, connecting with the divine, with God, that is worship. But still, in people's minds, it happened, one Sunday a week. And the struggle for pastors and for worship leaders, and even for people in the congregation, is what about the other 6 days of the week?
Right.
And so you would hope that the worship would be inspiring enough to propel you forward for 6 more days until you come back and recharge the batteries. And I've heard pastors say that, to frame that out. But that was the only option. I mean, maybe you'd have a midweek Bible study. I mean, maybe there were other opportunities to gather during the week, but not every church could do that. And other people couldn't do that because of their schedules. But now with digital offerings that take place online, they're more convenient for people, or Leslie, you had mentioned this, we don't live stream our services. We actually pre-record. So you can watch our service Sunday morning if you want, or Sunday night, or Wednesday morning, or Thursday afternoon, whenever you want to watch. And not just our church, people can watch other worship experiences and can enter into that throughout the whole week. So it keeps the energy going, and it keeps us conversations continuing throughout the week. And I actually think that's a real plus. And for our church, let's just say, to be able to think creatively. So how do we continue to inspire worship throughout the week, inspire our connections with God and with one another throughout the week? And we have some wonderful opportunities ahead to be able to dream what that can look like.
Yeah. And I think that a really interesting thing and overall beneficial thing of the internet is that these videos live on. I mean, we have stats from our YouTube channel that people are going back and watching worship from months ago. Wow. Maybe there was a sermon they particularly loved. Maybe there was a music moment that they particularly loved. Where else can you go and be like, I really liked worship on February 7th. I'm going to go back and experience that again. Like, how cool is that they can, I love Risa singing that piece. I'm going to go and enjoy that as I'm cooking dinner today or whatever, it's such a cool thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed.
So we're excited to spend this time together over the next couple of weeks. And then we're excited to come back to you guys. And who knows where we'll be?
Come back all disheveled.
It may be a 10-part series. Who knows?
It's just something. So we're so excited to share this with you guys. And if you're part of our local congregation and our online congregation, you can always find us here on, if you're watching this on YouTube. And we're excited to share this with you. So come back here next week for more podcasts, and have a great week, everybody.
Take care, everyone.
Blessings, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. Round Hill Radio is brought to you by the friends and members of Round Hill Community Church. For more information, please visit roundhillcommunitychurch.org.